Welcome to Last Minute Lecture. This free chapter overview is designed to help students review and understand key concepts. These summaries supplement, not replace, the original textbook and may not be redistributed or resold. For complete coverage, always consult the official text.
You know, when you sit down and eat a massive protein-heavy meal, say like a big steak or a huge plate of lentils, it's easy to just think, well, I'm building muscle.
Right, yeah, that's what everyone assumes.
Exactly. But if you actually zoom in on what your body is doing, you're not just digesting food. You're kicking off one of the most complex, high-speed logistical operations in the known universe.
Oh, absolutely.
So welcome to the deep dive. We're getting straight into it today, and, we're going to get through this dense physiology together. Today's mission is surviving and mastering Chapter 70 of Guyton and Hall's textbook of medical physiology.
The wild world of protein metabolism.
Yes, because here's the thing, and this is kind of mind-blowing. Your liver doesn't need cow protein. It needs human protein.
Right.
So how exactly does your body disassemble that steak, sort the, billions of molecular pieces and reassemble them into you without completely clogging up your bloodstream in the process?
It is a phenomenal logistical feat.
Yeah.
To understand why it matters so much, you have to understand a fundamental premise about the human body.
Okay, lay it on us.
Well, if you were to somehow boil away all the water from a human being, which, sounds terrible, but if you did, about 3/4 of the remaining body solids are proteins.
Wait, really? 3/4?
Yeah, 3/4. They aren't just muscle either. They are the structural beams holding your cells together, the enzymes driving literally every chemical reaction in your tissues, the nuclear proteins wrapped inside your DNA, and the transport mechanisms physically moving oxygen through your blood.
Wow.
So mastering how the body handles these molecules is quite literally the ultimate key to understanding human physiology. We're going to follow the textbook's logical chain today.
Right.
Starting with the anatomy of a single amino acid, tracking how it functions in the blood and cells, exploring how the body regulates this massive system, and finally seeing how hormones orchestrate the whole thing.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we can understand the regulation, we need to see the building blocks. I always picture them like Legos, but can you translate the textbook's figure 70.1 for us, just so we can really see these blocks in our minds?
Sure. So if you look at figure 70.1, it shows 20 unique amino acid structures. And the thing you notice right away is that the middle part, the side chain, can look completely different from one to the next.
Like different shapes and sizes.
Exactly. Some are simple carbon chains, some of these complex rings, some even have sulfur attached to them. But despite all those crazy differences in the middle, they all share an identical core anchor.
The universal connecting points.
Right. On one side, you have an acidic group, a carboxyl group, which is a carbon double bonded to an oxygen and single bonded to a hydroxyl group. And on the exact opposite side, you have a nitrogen-containing amino group.
So an acidic group on the right, amino group on the left.
Basically, yeah. Because every single amino acid has those exact same anchors. Any amino acid can link up with any other amino acid.
But how do they actually snap together? Because, they don't just bump into each other and magnetically stick, right?
No, there's a very specific chemical reaction called a peptide linkage. To link them, the nitrogen of the first amino acid's amino group binds directly to the carbon of the second one's carboxyl group.
Okay.
But to make room for that bond, pieces have to be removed. A hydrogen ion gets pushed off the amino group, and a hydroxyl ion gets pushed off the carboxyl group.
And a hydrogen plus a hydroxyl, that's just H2O, right?
So exactly. Those squeezed out pieces combine instantly to form a single molecule of water.
That is so cool. It's literally like squeezing water out of wet cement to lock two bricks together. The water leaves, the bond solidifies, and they are permanently locked.
That's a perfect way to look at it. And because they only used one side of their anchors to connect, the new, longer molecule still has an open amino group on one end and an open carboxyl group on the other.
So it can just keep going and going.
It does. An average protein chain is about 400 amino acids long. And they aren't just straight lines. Because of electrostatic forces, mostly hydrogen bonding along that massive chain, these strings twist and fold into incredibly complex shapes.
Okay, so we've got these massive twisted chains of 400 building blocks. Now we need to move them around. And here's where it gets really interesting.
Oh, definitely.
Because there's a paradox in the text that confused me. Let's say I drink one of those massive, 80-gram protein shakes.
Right, a huge dose all at once.
Yeah. If my body digests all of that, why doesn't my blood get completely thick with amino acids? I mean, you'd think the blood concentration would spike through the roof, but it only rises by a few milligrams per deciliter. Where does it all go?
Well, it's a dual mechanism that prevents your blood from turning to sludge. First, digestion takes a slow 2 to 3 hours. The gut is highly selective and breaks those folded proteins all the way down into free amino acids before letting them in.
So it's more of a slow drip than a flood?
Exactly. And second, once those amino acids finally trickle into the bloodstream, the cells, especially in the liver, absorb them incredibly fast. We were talking within 5 to 10 minutes.
Wait, 5 to 10 minutes?
Yeah. It trickles in over hours, but the second a molecule hits the blood, the cells just snatch it up. Because of that rapid uptake, the normal blood concentration hovers steadily between 35 and 65 milligrams per deciliter.
That's amazing. But how are they physically getting into the cells so fast? Because amino acids are huge molecules. They can't just slip through the cell membrane pores.
No, they're much too large for simple diffusion. They rely on facilitated or active transport, meaning the cell membrane has specific carrier proteins that actively grab the amino acids and use energy to pull them inside.
Oh, like a revolving door.
Exactly. And we see this exact same active transport in the kidneys. When your blood flows through your kidneys, these amino acids are filtered out into the tubules. But your body doesn't want to pee out these precious building blocks.
Right, that would be a huge waste.
So the proximal tubules use secondary active transport to pump them straight back into the blood.
But there has to be a limit, right? Like, if I just gorged on pure amino acids, eventually those renal pumps would max out.
They absolutely would. Just like any mechanical pump, they have an upper limit, which we call the renal threshold. If the concentration gets too high, the transporters just can't keep up, and the excess spills over into the urine.
Oh, okay. That makes total sense. So moving on to the cells that are snatching up all these amino acids, do cells just have giant piles of loose amino acids floating around inside them?
Actually, no. Cellular storage of free amino acids is remarkably low. The moment an amino acid enters a cell, the cell's messenger RNA instantly directs it to be assembled into an actual functional cellular protein.
Oh, I love that. It's like a carpenter.
How do you mean?
Well, if a massive delivery of lumber arrives at the workshop, a good carpenter doesn't just leave a giant, cluttered pile of loose wood on the floor to trip over. They immediately use the wood to build shelves or workbenches so the shop stays organized. But, if they need raw wood later, they can just break the shelves back down.
That is the perfect analogy. The cells store the amino acids as actual usable proteins. If plasma levels drop too low, intracellular lysosomal enzymes activate and rapidly decompose those shelves back into single amino acids.
And then they just ship them back out into the blood.
Exactly, to maintain that steady 35 to 65 milligrams per deciliter. The only exception is structural proteins, like your chromosomes, collagen, and muscle fibers. Those aren't broken down for routine supply.
Right, you don't tear down the load-bearing beams of the workshop just because you need a little extra wood.
Exactly.
So if the individual cells are storing proteins internally as shelves, what about the proteins floating in the blood itself? How do they support the integrated behavior of the entire body?
That brings us to the major plasma proteins, the heavy lifters. There are 3 main types: albumin, globulins, and fibrinogen.
Let's really get into those because I know they play massive roles, like albumin, for instance. I always hear it described as providing colloid osmotic pressure. What does that actually mean?
So think of albumin as a massive chemical sponge trapped inside your blood vessels.
Okay, a sponge.
Right. Blood vessels are naturally porous and fluid constantly wants to leak out into your tissues. But albumin is too big to easily escape through the capillary walls. Because it's trapped, water is drawn toward it via osmosis.
To try and dilute it.
Yes. That drawing force, that colloid osmotic pressure, is what holds the water inside your circulatory system, preventing your plasma from weeping out into your tissues.
Wow. Okay. What about the other 2?
Globulins are enzymes, but their main job is immunity. Your body's antibodies are actually a type of globulin, gamma globulins, and then fibrinogen is the protein that polymerizes into long, sticky fibrin threads during blood coagulation.
So it's the physical net that creates blood clots to repair leaks.
Exactly.
And the liver is the main manufacturing plant for all of these, right?
An absolute powerhouse. The liver forms up to 30 grams of these plasma proteins every single day.
So what happens when that liver factory suffers a systemic failure? Like in a patient with severe cirrhosis?
Well, cirrhosis perfectly demonstrates how this all ties together. In cirrhosis, destroyed liver cells are replaced by useless scar tissue. the liver's ability to synthesize proteins plummets.
So they don't have enough albumin.
Right. And without albumin acting as that sponge, the plasma colloid osmotic pressure drops. Fluid constantly leaks out into the interstitial spaces, resulting in severe, generalized edema, massive swelling all over the body.
Man, if you understand the cellular mechanism, the macro disease makes total sense.
It really does.
Now, looking at the body's entire protein ecosystem, it is in this constant, violent state of flux, right? If we visualize figure 70.2 from the top.
Yes, the reversible equilibrium diagram.
Yeah.
What's fascinating here is that an incredible 400 grams of body protein are synthesized and degraded every single day.
400 grams, that's almost a pound of tissue just churning.
Yep. And the body strictly maintains a ratio of tissue proteins to plasma proteins at exactly 33:1. It defends this equilibrium ruthlessly, even during starvation.
So wait, if I go on an extreme fast, my body will literally dissolve my functional tissue just to maintain this exact ratio in my blood.
It absolutely will. Tissue macrophages can even drink whole plasma proteins through a process called pinocytosis. They swallow the giant protein whole, split it into amino acids, and feed the starving neighboring tissues.
That is wild. Okay, so we're constantly tearing down and rebuilding. But where do the amino acids themselves actually come from initially? We don't just eat all 20 of them in perfect proportion.
No, we don't. And if we look at figure 70.3, it explains the difference between the essential and non-essential amino acids. Of the 20, 11 are considered non-essential, meaning our cells can synthesize them from scratch. The other 9 are essential, meaning we absolutely must get them fully formed from our diet.
So how exactly do we synthesize those 11 non-essential ones?
Through a brilliant mechanism called transamination. Basically, an enzyme takes an amino radical from an existing molecule and swaps it onto an alpha-keto acid. So, for example, it takes pyruvic acid, slaps an amino radical on it, and instantly it transforms into the amino acid alanine.
Oh, it's literally like taking an engine out of one car chassis and dropping it into another to make a completely different vehicle.
That is exactly what it is.
Yeah.
And glutamine acts as a massive storehouse for these extra engines. But to pull this off, the transamination enzymes absolutely require a derivative of vitamin B6. Without B6, the whole engine swapping operation grinds to a halt.
So what does this all mean? Can we burn protein for energy like we do with carbs? Like what happens when the cellular storage limits are just completely full?
We can burn it, yeah. Once the cells are maxed out, excess amino acids in the blood must be degraded for energy or converted into fat. But you can't just throw an amino acid into the cellular furnace.
Because of that nitrogen group, right?
Exactly. You have to strip the nitrogen off first in the liver. This is called deamination. The liver transfers the amino group to form glutamic acid, which eventually releases pure ammonia.
But ammonia is like household cleaner. That is highly toxic to the brain.
Extremely toxic. So the liver immediately executes the urea formation equation. It takes 2 molecules of toxic ammonia, forcefully combines them with 1 molecule of carbon dioxide, and produces 1 molecule of harmless urea plus water.
And then we just pee out the urea.
Right. If the liver fails and can't make urea, toxic ammonia builds up and causes a fatal hepatic coma.
Wow. Okay, so once the toxic nitrogen is shipped out as urea, what happens to the leftover carbon chassis of the amino acid?
The remaining keto acid enters the citric acid cycle for energy. Also, 18 of the amino acids can be converted directly into glucose, that's gluconeogenesis, and 19 can be converted to fats ketogenesis.
So your body can just turn excess protein into sugar or fat?
Basically, yes.
But what if you eat zero protein? Does the whole system just pause?
No, it can't pause. There's a concept called obligatory loss. Your body naturally degrades and loses 30 to 40 grams of protein daily just through normal wear and tear. You must eat complete proteins to replace it.
And complete means it has all 9 essential amino acids.
Right. If you eat a partial protein missing just 1 essential amino acid, the body can't build human proteins. It just burns them all for energy.
Which is why complementary proteins are so important. So what happens during prolonged starvation?
Well, carbs and fats act as protein spares. The body burns those first. But once they are depleted, the body rapidly digests up to 125 grams of its own tissue daily.
It literally resorts to burning the house's furniture to keep the furnace running.
Exactly.
All right, we've seen how anatomy supports the function and how function supports regulation. Now, what orchestrates this entire symphony? Let's talk about the master conductors, the hormones.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, hormones are the systemic switches. Growth hormone increases membrane transport and transcription, growing tissue almost indefinitely.
And insulin.
Absolutely necessary for synthesis. It reduces degradation and provides glucose to the cells so they don't have to burn amino acids.
What about the hormones that break down protein?
That's the glucocorticoids, like cortisol. During severe stress, they decrease tissue protein, especially in muscle, to flood the plasma with amino acids so the liver can synthesize life-saving proteins.
Got it. And the sex hormones?
Testosterone massively increases muscle contractile proteins by like 30 to 50%, but it caps out after a few months, unlike growth hormone. Estrogen has a similar but much smaller effect.
And finally, thyroxine.
Thyroxine just revs up general cellular metabolism. If carbs and fats are low, it burns protein. If they're high, it builds protein. It just presses the accelerator pedal on whatever metabolic state you're already in.
Wow. Next time you eat protein, think about this massive logistical operation happening inside you. We started with the basic chemical bonds snapping together like wet cement. We watched them rush into the blood, get absorbed by cells in minutes to build storage shelves, saw the liver pump out plasma proteins, safely package ammonia into urea, and finally saw how hormones orchestrate the whole thing.
It's an exquisitely balanced system.
Yeah.
And, this raises an important question based on the text mention of cancer.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Cancer cells are prolific users of amino acids. They act like a sink that drains the body's labile tissue proteins. If that's true, could medical science eventually figure out how to selectively shut down their specific transamination enzymes, like starving the tumor without disrupting the host body's delicate 33-to-1 equilibrium?
Now that is a thought to chew on. To you, the listener, next time you're staring at an impossibly dense physiology diagram, remember that it's all just logic applied to biology. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive, and a warm thank you from everyone here at the Last Minute Lecture team. Good luck on your exams, and keep diving deep.